Hello and welcome to day 3 of LDI. I hope you've really enjoyed the sessions so far this week, and I'm really excited about the 2 sessions we have on offer today. My name is Erin Gear and I'm the region lead for South Australia with CareerTrackers. I've been in this role for just over a year, having previously worked in the Brisbane office as well, so hello to anyone who recognises me previously from Brisbane. I'm joining from beautiful Tandanya, meaning place of the red kangaroo here on Kaurna country. And I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to all Indigenous people who are joining us today on this call and want to acknowledge the ongoing spiritual connection that they have with the land. Before I introduce our speaker, I would just like to remind everyone to please interact as much as you would like to via the app, and you can post questions on there so we can ask at the end of today's session with Sally. I'm really excited to introduce Sally Wolford, who has been a fantastic professional mentor for me and personal friend. She is currently the business director at MOA, Making Work Absolutely Human in South Australia, an organisation that helps businesses with cultural change. Sally's very passionate about diversity and inclusion and has worked across a range of public and private sector organisations working towards inclusion and diversity practices in South Australia. So Sally, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Erin. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all today. I'm actually up on Kaurna land, up in the foothills of Adelaide itself. Normally, I'd be in the office with Erin, but I'm locked down with COVID isolation. So hopefully the internet connection will keep us going today. Who am I really? It's a lovely introduction, but I'm absolutely somebody who loves this topic. I love the topic of how we can work together, how diversity and inclusion impacts every single one of us. And I am a true believer that if we could help increase inclusion in the workplace every single day, every one of us could do that little bit extra and we would have some fantastic cultures and workplaces out there. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey today. Next slide, please. So if we're talking about diversity and inclusion and things, I like to give a bit of an analogy for everyone. So if I use the analogy of a table, and more often most of us will meet or will eat around a table at some point in our lives. So it's quite an easy, simple one to do. When I talk about leadership, leadership is how we actually set that table. It's how we establish and we set direction and what we do and what we say that supports achieving our vision. Leaders provide guidance in how we deliver our services. And the leadership isn't just about defining roles in our organisation. I truly believe everyone has a role in leading. And then when we come to diversity, it's about having a seat at that table. So we each will bring differences to work. And it's these differences, gender, cultural background, ethnicity, age, language, a variety of differences. And they each bring some diversity into the workplace. It's those differences being welcomed and having that opportunity to be at that table. Inclusion is about having a voice at that table. So it's where those differences are really, really welcomed, but we hear the different voices, the perspectives, the approaches, and it's about them being valued, respected. And when we work in that inclusive environment, we really feel that safety part around us and that we feel that we're supported by others in there. And then when we go to belonging, belonging when you're sat at that table is having that voice be heard. So it's all very well and good to actually sort of be sat at a table. But if no one's listening to you or listening to your viewpoints, then it's actually sort of fruitless and you won't feel as valued. So it's that feeling when you're sat around that table that you're an important member of the team, an important member of the conversation, and it's being connected and you're part of something that's greater than you, greater than everyone else around that table, part of the whole. And then when we talk about culture, we talk about it about how we treat each other at the table and when we're not at the table. So the things, the words, the actions and the behavior matter, and they create that culture. And the culture sort of shapes how we all deliver our work every single day. And then it impacts both on our communities and within our own teams. So I like to see it that culture is sort of when you're there, but also it's what happens when you're not there to help influence those conversations. So there's a huge wealth when you talk about diversity and inclusion, and I feel like I'm preaching to people that are truly converted already. You look at some of the benefits of it, and we all look at this business case piece about why it's so important. But what I want to talk about is you're actually more likely to report being satisfied by your job, and you're more likely to be retained in an organization, you're more likely to be engaged, and you're more likely to perform better when you feel included and that you belong within there. And wrapped all the way around that is that culture. If you don't have that culture that is supportive and nurturing and valuing you as your individual selves, then you're actually going to want to go and leave. So you're actually not able to bring the benefits that you as that individual can bring to the organization. The other key thing with all of this is when we have diversity, we have different thinking. So when we're actually talking about that different thinking, you're more likely to bring innovative ideas into the workplace, into the organization. It's something like 5 times more innovative when you're actually in an inclusive organization. So whenever we're delivering or giving something to any place that we work, or in a student project, for example, when we have different thinking, we actually deliver far, far more innovative ideas, and we actually can create something that's really special and really, really different. Next slide, please. So I want to take a little moment and ask people to reflect slightly. So one of the things that I want you to reflect on is, firstly, have you ever felt excluded? And then secondly, have you seen others excluded? And they can sometimes feel very, very different. So when I talk about being excluded, it could be that you missed being invited to a party, or you're seeing pictures of everyone else doing something on social media and you weren't invited, or not being able to invited to an opportunity at work or something that's happening within that workplace. And I think we can all probably remember some time that we've been excluded in some way or another. When you talk about have you seen others excluded, it can feel slightly different to how you felt excluded. So you're seeing someone else feeling excluded. And sometimes you can see yourself where you've been that person and where you've actually experienced that exclusion, for example. But when you see someone else excluded, there's often a tendency to sort of be paralyzed, because you've been there before, you've seen it, and you don't quite know whether you can help them out or what you could do with that. And that's a very, very different feeling. But it all comes down to emotion. And quite often when we're included and when we feel like we belong, then it's a much, much warmer emotion, and you can feel it. When we're excluded, it's a very negative feeling. So I'll ask you the next question. What does belonging feel like for you? And then what do others do to help you feel that? Because when we actually feel belonging, it's not just us individually making us fit in that we belong. It's about what is that environment around us that can help us and can make us feel that we actually belong. And so for some people, they might be able to label the specific thing that makes them feel included and heard and that they belong, that you're valued and involved in something. For some people, it's like a big wow, I've found my place. And the picture there of us in 2 hats has got a little story. So my whole presentation is about stories. So I wanted to bring a couple of those personal stories. Very early on in my role at Moi, we all have a weekly wrap-up meeting on a Friday afternoon. Now, I'm an Adelaide Crows fan, so nobody boo behind the scenes here. And I thought it would be funny to just turn up in a Crows beanie with an Adelaide Oval background on it. And what I didn't know was that Michael in our office in Sydney had thought to do the same. And we didn't actually talk about it beforehand. And so we turned up at the meeting and we both looked at each other. And it was this one moment that I was like, actually, I belong here. I found my people where I can actually have fun and I can be included, and we can respect that actually, controversially, we support different teams. So it's a happy buzz is how I experienced my inclusion. And it's sort of interesting when I thought, actually, there's someone as crazy and mad as me, and I feel like this is a good place to belong. So next slide, please. So I want to talk a few little examples of like stories and inclusion impact. And they're probably one of the bigger ones that's happened recently is sort of this one. And it got a lot of publicity and it was all over the TV and things. But Usually when you look at the Ashes in cricket, and it is a big part of Australian culture and very, traditional. They're all out there playing cricket and the Boxing Day Ashes and things like that. And a traditional part of that is actually the champagne and celebrating that they've won it. Now, that's okay normally, and nobody's ever questioned it before. But in Hobart, when they actually went to do that, Usman Khawaja leapt off the stage, and that's what that photo shows, him leaping off the stage, and actually sort of tried to avoid it. And that's because he's a Muslim and he doesn't drink alcohol. So it totally goes against his culture to actually be around alcohol. And he really didn't want to be sprayed by it. And who can blame him, because that's not part of his culture and that's not part of him. So Pat Cummins, who's the captain, jumped off and got him back on. So he got him back on and interrupted what their normal cultural sort of norms are, and to make sure that he was included. So the next set of photos that there are of him actually back on stage, the alcohol's all away, and they're celebrating. It doesn't take anything away from the celebration to make that little bit of a difference. It was a big image because it was broadcast Australia-wide, but it was a very visible act of actually including someone in that. What I would say is Cricket Australia inclusive? Probably not. They got a long way to go. But this is the first sign that it's actually turning in that. And one of the things around the background of this is Usman Khawaja, he told media about 6 months ago about how he was struggling with the Australian identity and how to struggle with the team, because his background and his experiences was so different. So this sort of story, I think, is one of those big visible stories where it has a really big impact, and everybody gets to see it. The whole of society got to see this one because it was broadcast everywhere in the media, and there are an awful lot of cricket fans. So I'll go to the next slide, please. Now, inclusion isn't always the big bang and the big hurrah, and that's lovely that there's big ones that are happening, and you see lots of credible, really influential companies and businesses actually doing that. But more often than not, some of these pieces of inclusion are actually at that smaller stage. So I'll take you on another little story. Sally Stories, we will call this session. We've been working recently with a client over on the East Coast, and we were going through a consultation process, and we were consulting with an autistic employee at the time. And he said that he didn't always feel included, but the other day something had happened. So we wanted to hear his story. And he said to us, every day for 2 years, I have sat alone at the lunch table. And he said, that's okay. I'm kind of used to it. I'm kind of used to being different and not necessarily included. And this had gone on for about 2 years. He'd started in as a trainee through an access program. And then eventually, for one day, and we don't know the reason, one of his supervisors actually said, "Oh, do you want to have lunch with me?" And no prompt, no trigger, maybe they'd listened about how small impacts happen. He actually went and had lunch with the person, and it made his day. It didn't just make his day, it made his month, it made his years, because he totally felt like he was included. And they now have lunch regularly together, because the person that sat with him said, what do you mean no one's ever sat with you? And they had that conversation in a real human way with each other to actually learn about it. The colleague didn't realize, like, he didn't like sitting alone. He never thought about it. And then the employee sort of didn't want to raise it as an issue because, it's lunchtime. You don't really raise those things as an issue. And for many of us, we probably wouldn't consider like a small invite like that to be inclusion, but it's actually a really impactful way to actually include someone that's different into a conversation. So that story for me was more about being smaller acts of inclusion, but more impactful. And for that person who felt they didn't belong, it increased their sense of belonging and their connection to others within that workplace. And it was huge. We wouldn't see that one in the media, but the impact on the person and the respect that they're having is actually super important. So one of those tiny things, but super impactful. Next slide, please. So inclusion and belonging, like we all really want to feel like we're included and that we belong. Some of us do every single day. Some of us never feel like we belong in any shape or form, and that is one of those things that unfortunately some of us experience. When we talk about that diversity, we're really focusing on counting how many people from which background do we have in our organization, and many organizations actually focus on that with the targets to achieve this, to be representative of societies that we're living in. And then when we look at inclusion, it's about how we're including people. How can we include people with increasing diversity? So when we start counting, and most organizations and businesses count, when it comes around to that inclusion, it comes down to, what if I'm female? What if I'm Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander person? And what if I perhaps come from a low socioeconomic background and I'm younger? So when you have all these interrelating factors that come in, and some people call it intersectionality, it actually makes it harder. It makes it a lot harder for inclusion, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And then when we come to that belonging, it's not something you can head straight into. With belonging, it's about that feeling part of that team, part of the organization that you're belonging and that you want to be a part of. And you don't just get that from that initial counting. It's about creating that inclusive culture. It's about building that sense of belonging and supporting people in that. So there's challenges when it comes to inclusion. It is so much easier to surround yourself with people who applaud you and agree with you every single day. Like, let's be honest, we all like it if we come up with a great idea and everyone says yes. It's harder if you've got the person that says, actually, but what about? But they're valuable. Those opinions and that diversity of thinking is super valuable. And when you're with your yes people, they communicate like you do. They know about your background and your history. They know about your sense of community, and you just get each other. What I would say to you, though, is how do you actually listen to somebody whose views you completely disagree with? It's a very hard thing to enable inclusion when it's someone's views that you go, I disagree with this entirely, particularly when we talk about culture. And how do you conclude someone respectfully when they're fundamentally wrong and they're wasting people's time in that part of the conversation? It's a very subtle conversation to move them to a different point. It's a lot trickier. And where is that line? Where do you become effective? So if you're working in a team, how much diversity do you need? How much can you actually create in any conversation? And what if there is no innovation or new perspectives, even if you do have that diversity sat around that table? And they're not easy things to actually come across or cover. They're challenges, and they're big challenges that most people are now actually facing in the workplace. But it's that ability to be an inclusive person and an inclusive leader and be open and curious around all those differences that everybody has, that brings those new ideas, that brings those challenges and gives you totally different ways to be considered. And this is one of the skills in particular that employers are looking for into the future. More and more companies and businesses that we are working with want to know about the culture of any business and want to feel included. So most of the companies that we are now doing work with, more often than not, prospective employers are saying, what's the real culture like? Not the glossy brochure, what's the real culture like? And am I going to be included, and am I going to be supported to achieve more? And I would say, if you're looking for work or you're starting to transition out of the career trackers, that's something you should also be asking. What is beyond the glossy brochure that I will be genuinely included? And what is it that will actually enable me to be myself in that workplace? And I'm not talking about being on a wrap working group, because that is fundamentally always the thing that seems to occur for many of you from what I can see. But it's about what can you bring and what are the skills and the different experiences that will help that business. But what really, really matters to us as humans, and I wouldn't be working at Making Work Absolutely Human if I didn't talk about it in a human way. So what really matters, sorry, next slide, And there are some key things. There's 4 key factors. So we partnered back in 27 with Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre. We looked at over 27,000 pieces of data, and we actually looked at what makes people happy at work. And we called it the Happy Workers Report, which I think is the best title ever of a report. And there are 4 significant factors that make us most happy at work. First one is our purpose of the work and our contribution, and that what we are doing has a real sense of purpose and it aligns with what we personally want to do. Relationships. So when we talk about relationships at work, there's usually a group of about 8. And sociologists sort of call it your group or your team of 8. Now, they're not the people you necessarily work with. Those are the people that actually ask you how your weekend was. They're the ones that invite you for a cup of tea. They'll check in if you're missing or if something's happened. And they're the people around us who care. So if you didn't turn up to work, they're the ones that text you to go, is everything okay? Are you okay? The next one is agency. So agency over how you work and how you do your work. So not talking about freedom in every sense of the form that you can do the work absolutely you want, but you actually have a sense of freedom to do some of those things your way as an equal adult. And then we have a detractor of fairness. And fairness is that expectation that people like you will be treated fairly. And as soon as people like us aren't treated fairly, then it actually takes away from all the 3 others. So it works in that negative way against them and takes it away from them. So what else really, really matters as well to people? When we talk about high-performing teams, when you look at a high-performing team, every single person is relying on each other for the uniqueness and everything that they bring. And then that also leads to us expecting high performance from each other as well. So not only am I contributing, everyone else around me is also contributing, and we expect that from each other because we know each other, we know how we work, and we know that we're included, and we know what actually we all bring into that conversation or to that work. It's about trust. When we trust and we openly collaborate, when we hold information back or we don't offer extra information, then we start to lose that trust. And when you start to lose that trust, that's where you actually don't feel quite as safe in a workplace. And that's definitely not going to help nurture belonging in that workplace. Confidence. If I'm surrounded by people who are confident in me, then I'll actually succeed. And that's something Erin said, I've been a personal mentor to her. And when you actually inspire confidence to people, you can see them thrive and you can see them blossom and grow, which is a fantastic experience if you're one of those people that's helping someone to grow. And going back to us as humans, really, we're impacted by every single person around us. And when we talked earlier about and asked you to think about inclusion and how it felt, a lot of this comes back to emotions. We value those relationships, we value the experience, and we value being part of something bigger and better. And so our emotions, our feelings are a really key part of that. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk a little bit about everyday inclusion, because we don't have to do the big things every single day to help somebody feel included and that they can belong in any workplace or in any team or anything. So I want to just pose a couple more questions because I do like to pose them and make people reflect. What could each of us do? What do you say and do sitting next to someone at uni or work? Is there something you could do that just will help them feel a bit more included? Is there a conversation that you can have, or is there something, an action you could do that could help them feel more included? Who do you go with to grab lunch? When you're grabbing lunch, it sounds such a simple thing, but maybe invite someone different to grab lunch and have a bite. Hear more about their different background or their experience or a different story. And it's those, after you've heard their story, remember those little details. Those little details really, really matter because you can then reconnect and engage. And there is any part of any conversation, you can find something in common with the other person. You might not support the same teams or you might not come from the same background, but you will always find some common ground that you can have a conversation with them and create that connection. And that builds that sense of community within any workplace or any team, and then it builds bigger than that. Do you ask how someone's weekend was? And this sounds like a very strange story to tell you, but for every organization I've ever worked in for a very long time, I've always been that person that says, "Hi, how are you? You know, how was your weekend?" If it was a Monday morning. And it's interesting, there are not that many people that do that for every person. And so it sounds very simple, but just a "Hi, how are you?" with a friendliness can actually open up that communication way and help somebody feel more included. Sometimes someone might be having a really bad day, and actually that key conversation you're having in them can open up the pathways to talking about what's going on. And it helps you understand about what different backgrounds or different experiences are happening at home, or that they might be bringing into the workplace. And then the next part is like, do you listen to their stories? So when we listen to someone's stories, I'm talking about put the phone away. Because if you're listening to someone and you're playing on social media, you're not really listening. So it's about actively listening and engaging in the conversation, asking more details and questions to understand and learn more in that way. And then have you ever actually asked somebody, is there anything I could do to help you feel more included here? And it's quite a hard question to ask, but most people, if they're feeling excluded, would go, yes, actually, I'd really appreciate if I could get a cup of tea with you, or I'd really appreciate if in this next meeting you could actually ask for my view. You know, there's ways that we actually can do that. And it sounds so tricky, but there are actually very, very simple ways to do that. And when I say about everyday inclusion and talk about what each of us could do, we often expect the hierarchy in any organization or any business to be the ones that actually create and are responsible for inclusion. But I actually think it's all of our roles every single day to be able to do that. It's really, really important. I think that, and I chose that image up on the right there for you for a specific reason, that if every single one of us did a teeny tiny little action of inclusion, we actually could create this massive wave. And that massive wave is such a powerful thing for everybody to experience. And if each of us left here and did one little thing, who knows, next year at LDI, you might be here talking about your story of inclusion. So I'd like to put a call on you today. I'd like you to think about one thing to take away that you could put into action, either for yourself or for somebody else. And then actually, if we did a little drop each of us, would actually see a huge, huge difference to the culture of inclusion. And hopefully we'll get to the stage where everyone feels that they're included, that they belonged, that they're safe, supported, and can really thrive. I love to see that everyone's thriving. It's not about survival. And when we do talk about that diversity, tick the box, it's almost survival. So let's take it to that next step of inclusion and belonging and on into the future. And on that note, I think I hand over to Erin for questions. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Sally. That was really excellent. We do have a few questions coming through, which is excellent. One of them being, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, how do our interns navigate tricky conversations in the workplace when they feel their voice isn't being heard?
All right. So this one, I would say, as an intern, you're going to feel a lot more uncomfortable because you're new, you're on a placement. So there's this whole set of extra sort of constraints and sort of fear that comes in amongst it. What I would suggest is talking to your immediate supervisor, say to them in that workplace, I think I've got a great idea for this. Is it possible to chat or explore this? And encourage them to take that step to make you included in the conversation. If you're feeling excluded, also talk to them about, I'm not sure, for example, that when you do X, it actually makes me feel like Y, and I think I've got something to contribute. What I would say is always do it in a really easygoing kind of conversational way. If you feel like you're becoming angry, and you have every right to be angry that your voice isn't being heard, what happens quite often is when someone's angry in that conversation, you'll hit a brick wall, and so the anger will just go here and you won't be able to actually get your voice heard. So it's about planning and articulating it really gently and really carefully to say, I'm not sure that you realize, but, and that gives them the opportunity to sort of be enlightened, to go, actually, I haven't thought about that, and yes, let's include that. As a Career Trackers intern, quite often you get exposure to the very highest top of the organization, which is unheard of many other organizations. If you go in through a regular recruitment process, you very rarely get to meet the CE. So you have a wonderful opportunity there for your voice to be heard. So what I would say is plan what you want to say, go in nice and gently, and particularly if somebody is saying something fundamentally wrong, just do that nice gentle nudge.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's really great to point out that our interns quite often are in that really unique and exciting position to meet senior leaders and businesses. And I think we all know that as part of the learning contract, that is going to be set up from the start. So really great advice to use that opportunity to bring about inclusion and belonging in the workplace. I think we have another question coming through. In regards to the small steps that work to increase inclusivity that you mentioned, what have you found drives people to resist change, or if they're avoiding doing these things to bring about inclusion?
So now I've got a prime example of a current client for this. They have an action list of over 90 plus items that they want to increase inclusion. And it can be that's just wholly unrealistic about what you could achieve anyway in any year. So when I talk about small steps, what I mean is actually actionable, small bite-sized pieces that you can actually do to build to that greater inclusion, that greater sense of belonging. So little things such as making sure, like, for example, that there's an employee reference group that is representative, and how that connects into an organization is a key thing to help different voices be heard and to help support challenging perhaps some of those mindsets and some of those views that are sat around that board table or that executive that need to hear something that's slightly different. Sorry, I'll just go back to the question. Some of the barriers and some of those resistance factors, a lot of people feel that, and this is probably a privilege thing, there are a large number of people that have made its way to the top of an organization based on who they know, not necessarily what they know. And so those networks and that come with privilege and a privileged background can be quite confronted by the fact that actually there's a diversity search and there's different thinking and there's different generations coming into the workforce. And so it's about almost drip feeding the new thinking, drip feeding in some of these different things, not quite as a big bang, but slowly drip feeding that will help actually move the broader organization or the broader culture into inclusion as well. People avoid plans like the plague. Most organizations have so many plans with so many actions. And I think it's almost more worthwhile actually saying we want to create inclusive cultures and inclusive sort of a sense of belonging in any organization, and the actually just outline it and then enable employees to actually determine what that actually looks like. Quite often we focus on inclusion as being that count the box, rather than actually what does it really feel like, and that's where you want to get to that emotion and what really matters to the people here. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. That's really, really useful. We're having quite a few questions coming through, which is very exciting. Another one that I think is really excellent, seeing as a lot of our students are obviously in the formative years of their career and maybe feel that there's a bit of an age difference between them and a lot of their other colleagues. What are some ways that you think interns or grads can position themselves to feel more included in the workplace when there are people many more years into their career in the workplace?
So I always have this one that connect in, if you're anywhere new, always connect in with the IT team. They know lots of people and what's happening across the organization. I know that sounds strange. And try to connect in, not just stay in your own cohort of generation, but try to connect in with other people to learn more about the organization, learn more about how things sort of happen around here. You almost need to learn what is the existing culture like, what does it look like, to then be able to contribute fully, if that makes sense. Sorry, I've lost that question as well.
Yeah, there's too many coming through.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh my
goodness. Everyone's curious. No, that was really excellent though. What about if the culture in a workplace isn't ideal, however, someone is really keen to join the company because the work that is on offer? Is it bad to, ask for certain things before starting in terms of the, what you look for in a workplace culture?
See, I would actually say that several years ago, it would be frowned upon. But now it's actually an expectation that any applicant will ask, so what's the culture like here? So, how will I feel included? What are you doing in this space? So if you can connect to people that are already in there, because they will tell you what's behind the glossy brochure. Sometimes we have to go and do work where perhaps we feel we're not fully aligned or we're not necessarily going to feel included. And that's okay, because sometimes for your career path, you might actually think, actually, I could do with a year's experience in this to get me to that next step. It might not feel very safe. And so what I would encourage you to do is to make sure that you've got a mentor or someone that support around you within there. And you should be able to identify that in your supervisor, particularly. And then, is it a bad look to ask for certain things? No, I think most recruiters actually expect that now. I know several companies and several clients that I'm working with. One in particular actually does a separate interview towards the end of the recruitment process, essentially to find out how can we make you feel more included. So they actually have added an extra bolt onto that recruitment process to find out more about the individual, and it's usually done by the general manager. So they can actually find out, like, you're going to bring something amazing to our culture and this is fantastic, but how can we make you safe and make you feel supported to bring that here? So that's an amazing way to actually be able to achieve that. But don't feel scared to ask those questions. Ask them gently. And if they don't give you the answer you want, then think about, actually, is this right? Quite often your gut feeling will tell you in that sense as well.
Yeah, and I love, pointing that out in relation to the interview. It's, not just you being interviewed, but it's a two-way interview. And that's why, in all of the interview preparation that we do with interns, we ask you to have questions prepared, because you are interviewing, your company as well, to make sure it's the right fit. So, Sally, absolutely. I think that's really excellent for you to reiterate. So thank you. Another question, I hope that we still have time, that I really liked the sound of is in relation to your experience. What organizations do you think are best at fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace? What are the practical things that they've implemented throughout their organization to achieve this? So I suppose, green flags that, we should look for in workplaces before signing contracts.
So this one's a great one, because I get the privilege to sort of go in underneath the skin of several companies and look at actually what are they doing in this space. The ones that are best at fostering those diverse, inclusive workplaces are not the ones that necessarily just doing the plans and those action plans, because an action plan is so easy to do. The ones that are best at fostering that environment and are getting to that sense of belonging are the ones that actually deeply connect to employees. They ask for employee experience and employee feedback, and they use that to create their own story organizationally, and then they add that into their strategic planning. It's in every part of their business. So diversity inclusion doesn't sit over here. It's embedded through the entire part of the business, and that's when you know that they really mean it. In some organizations, you see it that it's just assigned off to people and culture or HR teams. So that's one of those red flags that I sort of think, actually, as soon as someone's talking that it's everybody's role and here's how we embed it in, I'm like, that's great. That's exactly where they want to be. Practical things that they've implemented through their organisation to achieve it. Flexible working, particularly when it's a male-dominated sector or organisation or business. When you start to see flexible working actually start to be implemented, you start to see all the different reasons why somebody wants to work flexibly. And I'll say COVID's helped accelerate that thinking. Some of the leave practices, so where they're not just saying we want to attract more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in here, but talking about cultural leave and what do those practices look like and how many times people are accessing them. So that it's actually, we're talking about supporting culture, not making culture fit into this box that's rigid and, to be quite honest, built by usually a white man. So that's really, really important. You start to see actually that understanding that culture is very, very different for different people and different experiences of it. Probably to those couple of things. I think you can see a lot when it comes to who's responsible for diversity and inclusion, and then equally how they go about that and how they're connecting with employees. If you just set something up at the top, it will never work. It's always got to be the groundswell from below to help make that change happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think those are some really great green flags to be looking out for, especially as our interns transition into grads and start looking for grad roles. And, obviously being able to feel, how heard you feel in the interview is a really great place to start, with that workplace suitability for you. I think we might have time for one or two more questions. And I like this question simply because obviously sharing an office with you, I hear some really, really great stories about some of the great work that you're doing at Moi. But are you able to share with us a specific example of a time that you helped implement or you noticed a positive and change to inclusion and belonging in an organisation?
Yeah, I think I had the privilege of coming into the South Australian Police immediately after they had an Equal Opportunity Commission review and found all sorts of discrimination and harassment. So I was going into a dark place, really, with 38 different recommendations. It sounds strange. The first thing we did in that is actually set a vision. What were we wanting to achieve? The second thing we then did said, 2 years of project won't help you achieve that. If you want culture change, it's 3 to 5 years. So we set the expectation up early about what are you going to see in 2 years, but you're investing into the future, because quite often you'll see a chief exec or an executive team want to see an outcome immediately. So we had to set the expectation that culture change and getting people to a sense of inclusion and belonging isn't an overnight success. And that is also why a lot of people default to the tick the box on the diversity card, because you can drive that almost immediately, but it's not going to help the organisation in the long run. So at SAPOL, we implemented 38 different recommendations. Probably the most significant one was in that flexible work. So prior to us actually changing and rewriting the entire the steps, there was like about 25 people out of a population of about 8,000 police staff who worked flexibly, and they were all female and they were all carers of children. So big problem. So what that led to was a sort of discrimination of females who worked part-time, because then they were seen as not wanting careers and they were seen as not wanting job opportunities. So what we did is we actually flipped it totally on its head, and we said all roles across the entire of the police force are flexible. And we used this phrase of, if not, why not? And that freaked, and I'll be honest, it freaked a lot of them out. And it takes some guts for a senior leader of any organisation to go, let's take a chance and let's go with it and see, can we achieve this? And we did. It was hard work. But we actually had a significant change. We completely flipped it on its head, and rather than setting out with a policy immediately, which is what a lot of people want, we actually said we're going to have a set of principles and here's what they are. It's about negotiated outcomes. It's about having conversations about what flexibility looks like for you. We took away the gendered element because we actually said we don't need to know the reason for that. We don't need to know the reason for flexibility here. Actually, I shouldn't weigh up whether you want to go surfing against somebody that's got a sick child. That's not part of this equation. We should be able to enable it for more people. And so that probably was the biggest driver of the cultural change initially, because all the conversations we had with them along the entire journey got them thinking in a different way. So if you can start those conversations to have people thinking in a different way and drip feeding it in, what eventually started to happen, so we went with each of these recommendations, what eventually started to happen is they realized that actually this is having an effect. People were happier. And the other effect, particularly for flexible work, was people were having to chuck sickies to actually manage their lives. So there was a huge decrease in sick leave after it started to roll out. That piece of work particularly also led to really great union engagement, and eventually it actually changed the police enterprise agreement. So the whole police force now has opportunities to flexible working arrangements were never before in that piece. So I'd say that's probably the biggest fundamental shift if you can move to there. The irony is that initially when we first looked at the data, it was all young females asking for it. At the end of the rollout, it was actually older men wanting part-time or compressed weeks. So it completely changed the gendered element, and the whole discrimination piece started to go.
Oh, incredible. And I'm sure that helped improve a lot of men's mental health as well. Perhaps not even realizing it was something that they could ask for. And yeah, SAPOL, I know, is a huge employer in South Australia specifically, as any police force is in every other state. So really exciting, the changes that we've been able to see here, and hopefully more workplaces start to implement those sorts of things once it's been demonstrated, at a really large public sector employer. I hope that I have time for one more question, and I thought we'd finish off with a bit of a tricky question, just to throw you a challenge, Sally. I like the sound of this question. Obviously, I think at CareerTrackers and similarly to you at Moi, we find that quite often we surround ourselves with people who are reflective of our worldviews and our vision. And I don't know if anyone ever watched that documentary on YouTube, The Social Dilemma, about how our newsfeed and social media content, ends up being, reinforcing the worldview that we have. In reality, when we interact with people at work or just on the street, that's not going to be the case. We're not always going to come across people that share our same values and worldviews. So just a bit of a preface to what I'm about to ask. How does an intern navigate a situation where they feel their manager is not supportive about diversity and inclusion, and it's something that, they can tell goes against their personal views? That's obviously very tricky thing to answer succinctly, but I'm keen to sort of get your 2 cents there.
All right, I'm going to give you a little technique. We called it calling in. So this is where that you're not particularly happy with the way that they're working, and you sort of think, hang on, this is fundamentally wrong. I totally disagree with it, but you're my supervisor. How do I manage this? So when we call it calling out, if you're like a bystander to something, is you're really calling it out publicly and openly. When you talk about calling it in, we talk about it in the sense that there's an opportunity to explore what they said, but also find a way to increase their understanding. And so it's sort of focusing more on that, getting them to reflect, not react, if that makes sense. So a couple of good phrases that when you could raise, say, I'm not sure if you're aware when this happens, it makes me feel X, or if it's like a behavior or something that they're doing, some useful phrases that you can use are, I'm curious, what was your intention when you said that? So try to find out what's the intention of the person and what they're saying, because that'll give you some insights about how their mind works. And that also gives you opportunity to go, actually, they've got a knowledge gap here and perhaps they didn't realize. And then you've got that opportunity to help fill that knowledge gap for them. Another little one that you can do is, how might someone else see this differently? So if they're talking about something, you're trying to get them to look at it from someone else's shoes. So trying to encourage them to look at it through a different viewpoint. Or if it's something that you're fundamentally sort of disagreeing with and you're like, oh my goodness, this is absolutely incorrect, you can sort of say, like, why do you think that's the case? Why do you believe that to be true? And then you can start to unpick what they're saying, or what they're doing, and it can actually really, really help you to actually talk about that. There's a lot of outdated viewpoints still around in this space. And so you might find that actually it might be good to say, oh, look, I'm not sure if you're aware, but here's what's happening. Quite often a lot of organizations are sort of very insular and they're sort of stuck in these ways and they don't look externally. So you might find a news article or something is good to share with them, to just encourage them to think a bit more broadly, or to kind of give them the expectation that this is what society expects now and you're a little bit behind with it. But I don't want to say that you're behind with it, but I'm going to encourage you to actually come on the journey, because more often than not, the rest of the organization will be on that journey. If you're finding that your manager is not supportive in any shape or form, look at the behavior of what they're doing, because you might find that actually some of the behaviors that they're doing could be discrimination as well. And then you might want to consider actually taking it further through some of the more sort of formal reporting ways as well. But I like to use calling it in, because what it does is it helps show that you're openly listening to their viewpoint, and then encouraging them to actually learn and grow as well. So it's quite a nice technique to use.
Yeah, that's really useful. I actually wrote down a couple of those sentence starters that you mentioned yourself. So hopefully I can, use that in best practice, and, supporting the students that I'm working with as well. So thank you so much for answering all of those questions so well and super, super interesting. I also just want to mention to the students that obviously diversity and inclusion and belonging is a topic that will be quite close to home for many, if not all of you. And if you do feel that this conversation has brought anything up that you're hoping to discuss with your advisor, please reach out to us, and we're always open to having those conversations to best support you and, support you to be an advocate for yourself and advocate for you where we can for your internships. So, please don't hesitate if this has brought anything up.
And I'm equally happy to distribute some of these wonderful phrases and pieces that we can help as well.
Oh, that would be wonderful, Sally. always after your wisdom.
Always happy to help.
Wonderful. And I think we're going to throw to a student now to just say thank you.
Thank you, Sally, for your time and effort in sharing the work you do at Maya with us here at CareerTrackers. Really found your work with the Happy Workers report really valuable, and it's some points for us to take away back into our workplaces to look at who's in our relationship in our teams and outside the teams, as well as our purpose and contribution to our team and the work we do, as well as fairness and agency to think about how we can maintain happiness within our teams as well. Another really good point I found was the cultural importance in the workplace and how important that is for us to be happy and be comfortable in working there, as I know all of us are interning. So we obviously want to be comfortable and be able to go to work every day without, wanting to leave the place early or have time off type of thing. So as a thank you on behalf of CareerTrackers, we'll be sending a gift as a token of thanks. And thank you all for tuning in to session 1 today, and look forward to session 2 later on today.
Hello and welcome back to the second session of LDI for 2022 on Wednesday. My name is Erin Gear and I'm the Region Lead for South Australia. And before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the land that we are gathered on today here in Ghana country and the lands that we're all gathering on from across the country today. I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging as well. And acknowledge obviously all of the Indigenous people who are joining us here today on this call as well, and acknowledge the spiritual connection that you have with the land is ongoing. I'm super excited for today's keynote speaker, Anthony Wilson, who is the Managing Director of Nood Australia, which is a sustainable and environmentally friendly personal care organisation. And Anthony has had a really exciting career working across organisations such as A Mentoring and the Workabout Centre, and having had previously played a season of AFL with the Adelaide Crows as well. So Anthony, we're really grateful to have you here to talk about your career journey and your experiences navigating, the last few years of your career.
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction, Erin. So I guess I'm here to talk a bit about myself and my journey, and understanding, I guess, how to navigate culture and business, which has been a massive journey for myself over the last few years. So firstly, just touching on myself, I'm a proud Ngarrindjeri Ghana man, also from Narungga. Have ties to Aranda country up in Alice Springs, but as Jayla would know, have so much family down here in South Australia that everywhere you go, you're pretty much related to everyone. But I grew up in a household with 8 siblings. So I'm one of 8 siblings. Being the eldest male in my family, sort of a lot of responsibility always falls back onto me. I've got 2 older sisters, and the rest being younger. My parents obviously separated when I was a little bit younger. But yeah, my journey's sort of been amazing. I've had some really great role models in both my parents, my grandparents as well. My grandmother being a massive advocate for Aboriginal education here in South Australia, and my dad being a painter by trade, so working on his own for a while, and then moving into education a little bit later. But yeah, I guess my journey from I guess childhood right up to now, being age almost 30, has been quite wild. Again, having a lot of siblings has been great. A lot of challenges. And I guess having 2 brothers who are very close in age to me, we always pushed each other along. So people actually don't realize that I have 8 siblings. I always just think I have 2 brothers because we're so close together. But I guess for me, I guess what I've wanted to talk about is sort of my journey on from school, going into different workplaces, trying to find my way in life, understanding who I was as a person, understanding my cultural obligations, understanding, I guess, myself was probably the biggest part, and then obviously finding myself into the business space that I'm in now, in owning Nood Australia. I've got a couple of other projects and businesses as well, but Nood Australia being the main one at the moment. How that was founded, and how I come to sort of understand business, but also balancing, I guess, business and culture and business, and meeting all those obligations for I guess what I like to call is the 2 worlds that we live in as Aboriginal people, both Aboriginal culture, also, and Western culture as well. So I guess for me, as Erin said, my journey has taken me from graduating school back in 2010. I went on to uni a few times. I guess for me it was a process. I always thought I wanted to go to uni. I got there, and I didn't actually enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I eventually dropped out 3 times, so I did give it a red hot crack. So don't blame me for dropping out 3 times. But I did study primary middle education twice, and then went into business management, which I also dropped out of. But throughout that time, I worked in different roles, as Aaron said, AIM mentoring the Workabout Centre here in South Australia, which is also working with Aboriginal youth across the state. I worked in insurance compliance. Please don't ask me what it's about because I still have no idea what it was about, but I did that for 2 years. I worked in sports admin, working with remote football leagues up in the APY lands, and then was pretty fortunate enough that, again, football and sports being a massive part of my journey, that I was pretty fortunate enough to be drafted to the AFL, and live out a boyhood dream of being a professional footballer. But unfortunately, that didn't work out. I didn't get to play a game, but I got to train, I got to eat, I got to live, I got to breathe playing football every single day. That was probably my biggest learning curve. I learned that I could be as physically fit as I wanted to be, but if you weren't mentally ready for that challenge, it's a whole different ballgame. I never realized how much hard work goes into football mentally until that point of my career. But again, I made some lifelong friends when I got there. It was, I was running around kicking football with Eddie Betts and Patrick Dangerfield and Charlie Cameron, who I still have really good relationships with. But yeah, as I said, it was, for me, I took away from that as not being, not. I took away from that it wasn't that I wasn't good enough to play AFL. It was that I wasn't ready to play AFL, both physically and mentally, and probably more so mentally than anything. I once I left that AFL system, I went into work for AIM for a few years, looked after South Australia and a bit of the NT. And throughout that journey, I just sort of felt like I was coasting. I was really not pursuing anything more than what I already knew. I was not challenging myself every day. I was sort of getting into this flow of, check in at 8 o'clock in the morning, check in at 9 o'clock, finish at 4, go to training. I wasn't interested in uni, but I just felt like I was getting, I was becoming stagnant, and I just didn't know what to do with myself. And obviously I always had a keen interest in business. And I started to look at what was really going on in the market, what was happening. And this idea of Nood Australia came up. Obviously before then it wasn't actually called Nood. It was just a stupid idea where I thought, what if I make some like hand soaps and stuff using native botanicals, using these really cool things. And at the time there's a lot of people doing a lot of things in food, and beers and wines and everything else. So I tried to find this little niche, which has been pretty amazing. So I got to a point where I did all my research. I did a whole business plan. I've done all my research on the market, and I think around 2017, Nood came into light. I launched Nood in August 2018, and left AIM at the end of 2018. I went into working in Nood full time. So over a course of 2.5 years of a year and a half of planning and building and trying to grow Nood to a certain point where I could actually walk in and actually pay myself and do quite well. It was a pretty tough ask. But what I found through my time in business, a lot of barriers, especially having investors who came into play who weren't Aboriginal people and didn't have a great understanding of Aboriginal culture. I found that, it was the biggest barrier was mixing culture and business with culture. What I have found and what was very tough for me was trusting my intuition and trusting my gut when it comes to making decisions about what was culturally safe and what was culturally sensitive and what actually mattered to me and my family and my community as a business owner. People always say you got to have a bigger motive when you go into business than making money, which is so true. And yes, at the end of the day, when you start a business, you want to make money, but you also have to think at the bigger picture of why you're doing this. What's the biggest thing? What do you want to get out of it away from money? My biggest thing was building self-sufficiency within Aboriginal communities. How do I help create a change of helping Aboriginal communities become self-sufficient, that we no longer rely on government initiatives or government funding to help us be who we want to be and drive what we want. In that journey of understanding who I was, understanding cultural sensitivity, or cultural understanding, I felt that I had lost my way a fair bit in the early stages of my business. I didn't actually speak up about what I didn't agree with. I let these business owners who had been in business for 30 years do their thing and tell me how to do things, and I just allowed it to go. But over that time, what I found was I was getting more and more less motivated. I was getting this weird sickness in my stomach that I think most of us here would fully understand what it is when we know we're in a situation that isn't healthy, both physically and mentally. We know that we need to move away. We need to actually stand up and say something. And that's why I remember the day. I remember where we were. I remember I was sitting there, and I got up and I said, no, we're not doing that. And I think at that moment, that's when my whole business had changed. It went from me having 3 investors to me clashing heads with business partners, 3 investors that were just trying to make money out of culture. So understanding ourselves, understanding our culture, understanding everything that we have and we've been taught over our lifetime from family, from a cultural perspective, but also value-wise through our families, what we learn. I mean, and you guys are going to hear from the guy who's taught me so much about culture on Friday, in my uncle, Jack Buckskin. I've been pretty fortunate enough to grow up around culture all our lives. And I know Jalen is who's on this call as well is the same. We've been pretty fortunate enough to grow up with culture, with language, and now having someone like Jalen who can speak Ghana language fluently, practice dance and culture and all those things. It's been amazing. It's about, I guess, our cultural obligation as people in the positions that we sit in, understanding that we are the key to building a bridge between two separate worlds in both non-Aboriginal people and Aboriginal people. I never understood that growing up in high school. I always sort of sometimes shied away from being an Aboriginal person. People would be like, oh, what nationality are you? And I would never tell people. I would just be like, oh, you can guess. And they'd just be like, oh, you're something exotic. So I just went with, I'm an exotic person. It wasn't until I got into my mid-20s where I started to actually understand the importance of being an Aboriginal person, understanding my obligations to my family, especially being a role model to my younger siblings who are, close to 10 years younger than I. It was, about showing them what it means to be an Aboriginal person and a strong Aboriginal person, and making sure that we stand up for what we see as right. So throughout my whole business journey through Nood, I went from owning 55% of Nood to now obviously standing up for obviously the cultural intellectual property that we have within our business, to now owning 90% of Nood, because the investors didn't actually want to have a strong Aboriginal person. They just wanted to have an Aboriginal person who was going to do what they said. So for now, that's a journey over the last 3 years of Nood. So going from being the person who just takes the money, listens to what they say, do as they say, monkey see, monkey do. That's what I was doing until I started to actually feel really, really sick about it in my stomach that I said something, and now I take on Nood at a 90% capacity, and even at to the point where by the end of the financial year I'll be 100% owner of Nood Australia, and be able to continue to tell the cultural stories behind our products, behind each native botanical we use. And to be able to share that with communities, and to be able to give communities a voice to tell their stories and why each native botanical has a significance within their community. Right now, I think the power of Aboriginality within business, within the workforces right across the country is having a massive shift. I think most of you younger, like I'm talking like I'm really old here, but most of you coming through who are just a little bit younger than I actually have a whole different perspective and the way you do things. I mean, you guys grew up on social media platforms. You know how to voice your opinions. You know how to say things that you want to say, and are very and can articulate exactly what you want. And the great thing about that is, I feel the younger generation that are coming through now have had so much life within westernized culture that we've educated ourselves at their own game. So we understand westernized culture enough. We now understand a lot more Aboriginal culture that we can actually start to bring those together in this next generation. So that's a power that we have as Aboriginal people, and that's the power of Aboriginality within business sector at the moment, and somewhere I'm trying to get to as well. So even for me as an older person, I can still lean on someone like Jalen to teach me a lot about culture, to teach me a lot about language, and it's all about how we educate ourselves. Business, I guess my business journey has been pretty hard, because again, I didn't go to uni, I didn't study business. But the one thing I know about myself is I learn by doing. I'm a good reader. I can read, I can write. I graduated high school. I just know that I struggle to sit there and read all day. And I struggle to sit down behind a desk and write everything. But what I do well is when I'm out doing things, I can learn or do things 2 times over, and I pick it up. I can start to navigate it. I can really just dive into it. And I think that's a great thing that this business has done for me, is taken me well out of my comfort zone of sitting behind a desk at AIM, and telling young kids to pursue their dreams, pursue their passions. I think also that's where I sort of sat there, and I felt a little bit like I was lying to the kids, because I wasn't doing the same thing that I'm telling them to do. So, understanding ourselves, understanding our own intuition, understanding who we are as people, as individuals, and understanding culture is super important. I really had a flow on here for a while, but I sort of had a bit of a brain dead moment, and trying to understand whereabouts I am in this conversation at the moment. So, I mean, I've had some questions that I've sort of written down, and sort of tracking through them slowly, as quickly as I can. But the next thing I've written down is what does it mean for connection to country for me? I mean, for all of us, it's super important for us to understand who we are as people, and being connected to country is super important. I know for me, me and Jalen are actually related, but I know he's an ocean man. He loves the salt water. Jalen knows me. I'm also a river boy, so I love fresh water. But understanding that for me to feel at peace, I need to go back to country. And for me, going back to country is going back to the river, and being by fresh water, being grounded, being at peace with myself. If I ever spend too long away from the river, I start to get a bit aggro. To be honest with you, I get a little bit upset and angry. So it's super important for us. And look, some of us may know exactly where we're from. Some of us have different journeys, where we're still trying to piece where we come from. It's super important that we find something that we connect to, that we relate to, and not just culturally, but as an individual. What do you connect to? Are you a hills person? Are you a sandy beach kind of person? Are you just a green grass kind of person? You just need to connect to something. It's super important that we actually find what brings us peace, in terms of country, and go out. The great thing about working with places like AIM were that they would actually teach me to take time off, re-energize myself, put myself into spaces that, actually help me calm my mind, calm my soul, and actually bring peace to myself going back into the workplace. So we'd always do every Friday, end of month. They'd send us out for half a day. Said you don't start until 12 o'clock. Um, go out, do what you need to do, go to the beach, go read a book. But when you come back in, let us know what you've done this morning. Take a photo, take a video of what you've done, and then come back in. So that was a really cool way for me to actually, not realizing that I didn't do enough of that, to then realize, I need to do more of it. That was how I started to understand the balance of I guess, a work-life balance, but then also understanding had to have culture and work-life balance at the same time. The great thing about Aboriginal culture is we're not very money driven. We are culturally, we sort of just, we're happy to push money to our family no matter what, which is great, right? We're not a very selfish person. We're not selfish people. We're actually very family orientated, and that's the one thing I learned growing up is sometimes it's okay to be selfish. We do need to save. We do live in a Western society that we do have to be sort of somewhat money driven. But I'm so glad I've grown up in a culture where we aren't money driven, that we are just trying to make sure that we feed everyone at the table and not just ourselves. I think being in business with non-Aboriginal people, that's what it's taught me, is a lot of people don't realize the implications of who we have to feed. Again, I'm one of 8. I'm the eldest. I have obligations to my family. What I now have to do for them is, whether it's my last $20 that goes to my mum, whether it's the last $50 that goes to my mum, that money's not mine. That money belongs to my family. It's a frustrating thing, but that is the reality of the world we live in. But it is also super important that we understand the importance of money in a Western sense, that we also, set ourselves up for the future, and that we also then help create ourselves self-sufficiency. And that's, I guess, that brings me back to where we started. That's my whole aim in business. That's my whole aim as a community member, is how do I build self-sufficiency within communities. The biggest challenges that I've faced in saying those things that I've just said about money and being, Western culture being a bit more money driven than Aboriginal culture, the biggest challenges that I've faced is the lack of understanding around Aboriginal culture and why we are the way we are. People don't understand that as Aboriginal communities, we didn't actually earn any money until the late 1970s. for communities. When you think about that, that's not very old. Like very long ago. Like that's my mum would have been 16, 17, and my mum's not that old. But the lack of understanding from non-Aboriginal people about why money is important to us in the sense of being able to help family out, but also the lack of understanding from family of being a startup business and not actually having a whole lot of money. What I found was my family always felt like because I had a startup business or had a business that I was bringing in $1 million a year, and I could just afford to pay all these bills and all this money out to family to help out with things. Little do they know that you're paying yourself very pretty much a traineeship wage just to get by. Um, that were the two biggest challenges that I've had in business, and that they're both easy to deal with, especially if you can communicate very open and honestly with I guess your business partners, with your investors. Obviously, your family will think you're talking a lot of BS, but once you obviously show them some proof, they'll come around a bit. So, yeah. I guess if we go back to obviously the importance of Aboriginal culture within business, um, what are some of the key elements and strengths that I took away from it, and took into my business, and how did that help me navigate my way through business, and how did that help me navigate my way into negotiating how the business looks, how much ownership I take within the business. It would have been very simple for me to go, what, I don't want to do any of this. You guys can do it. You just pay me X amount of dollars a year, and I'll sit here and be your marketing dude. I'll just stand here and take all your photos for you, be in all your photos and pretend I'm the face of it. But that didn't sit right with me, knowing the changes that I could make, being the voice, being the face, and driving the business the way I wanted to drive it rather than being told how to drive something. As I said before, it took me ages to find confidence talking about culture, and taking time to learn more. But as I got older, it made me. I actually hung around some mates of mine who are very cultured. One of my good mates is from Sudan, and I remember us going out for dinner one night, and he picked up his phone. He started speaking Sudanese to his sister. Didn't understand the word he said, obviously. And then my other mate of mine was from the APY, so Anagul Pitjara lands, and he picked up his phone. He was talking to his mum in Pitjara, and I was sitting there, and I was in awe of both of my mates being able to speak another language. Either of us wouldn't have been able to understand each other. But it made me realize how much culture I didn't sit back and learn. And it was quite a painful thing for me to look at and try to understand, because here I have my older brother, my uncle here, who teaches language, teaches culture, and I wasn't sitting down being a part of those conversations, and I have no one else to blame but me. So I've now taken time to, set my business up in a way that I can now go and spend time with family and sit down and listen about culture, talk about culture, learn language or relearn language, all of those things, going out onto country. But it took just a small little moment like that to actually make me realize how selfish I have been in terms of neglecting culture. As I said, Jalen sitting here looking, seeing Jalen's face on the screen, it makes me realize how much, Jalen is younger than me, but how much more he can teach me about culture. Um, which is amazing. You know, understanding that learning is a strength, not only in Western culture but in Aboriginal culture as well. You know, understanding learning not about you know math, science, and everything else, but your own mental health, your own science of what your body is telling you. You know, I'm a person who never ever gets sick. But what I do know is that when I do get sick, that is my body telling me it's time for a rest and that I've worked way too hard to do. Worked way too hard in what I'm doing. So understanding and learning about all those things actually brings you to a point of understanding what you want to do in life. Um, yeah. So understanding Western culture, which is super important for you guys in a part of career trackers in universities and schools. Educate yourself as much as you can. The only way we can create change for what we want, the only way you can create change in business, anything like that, is by educating yourself in Western education. Also, then take into the I guess the learnings you can learn from your families, from people in the community in terms of Aboriginal culture, but then also understand yourself is super important. I think I put that above the others. Understand who you are, understand what's important to you, understand what those things can do for your own mental health and what you can do. Um, I guess from my perspective in what I've I guess talked about over the last sort of 20-30 minutes or so, I guess my takeaways from a lot of things. I'm someone who has massive anxiety. I stress a lot. I guess again, I have a lot of obligations to fulfill within my family, within myself. I have a lot of high expectations of what I can do for community. I guess I also realized throughout my time being in the AFL system, that I have a lot of performance anxiety. Um, so I'd get really, really stressed by all these, if I didn't train well, if I didn't play well, if I wasn't doing the right things, if I didn't, if I was sick a day, I never wanted to miss. I had a very short contract. I guess for me, things happen for a reason. Um, I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen Kung Fu Panda, um, but the old turtle in there, the master, I can't remember his name, but he says there are no accidents, and I use that quote a lot because there isn't. Everything happens for a reason, and that's the greatest thing about it. So I do apologize. I think I've used up a fair bit of my battery here. I may have to put that on if that's okay. Um, so yeah, they're my biggest takeaways is learn to understand yourself, and then you understand you know your, I guess your anxiety levels. I guess being in a sports field and a very male dominated field, I really got caught up in toxic masculinity. I was very much what do you call it, a very young person, and I was so driven by what everyone else is doing and wanted to replicate what they do, which sometimes was good and other times weren't. And so for me, I look back on my journey, from this kid in high school playing football, being caught up in this toxic masculinity process of what a footballer is, um, to now being pretty much retired and understanding that I was just masking a lot of things that my body was telling me in terms of my stress, my anxiety, um, you know, not talking to people about how I was feeling to now being able to do those things, which has been great. And the greatest thing about that is I've realized how much my circle has changed. Who is there to care for me and who's actually not there to care for me. Um, so that's a bit of my journey. Um, I hope you get a bit out of that, and I'll pass you back to Erin.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure how your battery is going. If you want to find a charger while I, just say a couple of thanks and have a look through some of the questions. But thank you so much, Anthony. I think that all of the interns will have a lot to resonate with what you said and to take away from, some of your life lessons and your advice as well. I particularly like what you said about, that you learn by doing. And I think that's the whole philosophy that we have around, the purpose of the internships and, not just waiting until you finish university to start getting that experience relating to what you want to do with your career. So I thought that was really excellent. And, navigating culture and business, I think, transcends just beyond culture and business, but culture and the workplace as well. I think a lot of interns will have their own experiences that they will resonate with. We have a few questions coming through that I'd like to ask. One of them that I really like is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? And so whether that's professional, personal, cultural, something that really resonated with you.
Sorry, can you repeat that one, Erin?
Yeah, the question. Yeah, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received, whether that be personal, cultural, professional, something that's really resonated with you?
Damn. I couldn't put one down. I guess I'm a little bit different. Like, I probably watch way too many cartoons to chill myself out. I probably have to just say I listen to Dory's advice from Nemo. Is just keep swimming, which was probably something that I just kept doing. Is just I kept moving, kept trying to understand. I think I wouldn't say there's one piece of advice that I can say that really sits in my mind to pass on. I guess there's been different quotes or different things that I've taken from different people for different reasons, but not one that literally comes straight to my head to go, this is a piece of advice I live.
No, that makes sense, and can definitely relate. I think there's a lot of wisdom that comes out of cartoons, so I definitely appreciate that, the Kung Fu Panda and Finding Nemo references. And I know, just to think, a few students will be interested in relation to what you mentioned about the fact that Jack is going to be a keynote speaker on Friday. If there's, anything particularly that you feel, good advice from him as, as a, someone from a community that you look up to.
So I do have one moment that sits in my mind when I first started my business. I was actually doing a bit of part-time work in a warehouse for one of my future investors, and this new guy had started. He may have been there for about 2 weeks, and I had literally finished up and was going full time into Nood as of that day. And he come up to me and he looked at me and he shakes my hand and goes, "Congratulations." He goes, "But make sure you find the best accountant and best lawyer you can, because you're now swimming with sharks." And for some reason, that moment sat with me for a very long time, and I had no idea what he meant by it until obviously the whole incident of me standing up and saying what I said about business and culture, and my investors sort of all were like, "Yeah, no, we don't agree." So then that comes back to full circle of what he told me on my first ever day as a Nood employee.
Yeah, I hope you heeded that advice and it's worked out for you in the long run. Seems that way. Just speaking of those investors, we have another question relating to that, which I thought was really interesting, because you mentioned that those early investors that, initially let you do the thing once you changed your mindset and stood up to your beliefs, did those investors stick around or did your investor base change? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, look, it was a long process, but majority of all those investors have left. I've still got two of them in there at the moment, but as I said, they're sitting at a very minimal shareholding. Um, but it is what it is for now. I now take over everything. Um, we've agreed for them to not be able to have a say or do anything in the business. They're just there to. So obviously, Nood has a potential to buy them out.
Yeah, incredible. That's really exciting. I'm excited about the future direction of Nood. I was just saying just before we jumped onto this call that I use all the hair care products and hand creams myself. So I think, super exciting that you're going to have sole ownership very, very soon. We have a question from an intern who's interning at Sky City. Taylor Locker is asking, what is your advice for someone looking to start an Indigenous business? Because she's been thinking about it for a while, but it's not sure where to start. So whether there's, certain associations or bodies that would be, a good starting point, or, what your sort of recommended first steps be.
I think for me, I guess my journey was a little bit different to businesses of now. I think just doing your research, understanding your market is super important. Again, I know for me, I'm a little bit lazy, but this is something that I was passionate about, and I did my homework, did my research, understood what there was to do. Um, I mean, look, there are a lot of ways in terms of if you need startup money, there's a lot of different ways you can get it now. You have places like First Australian Capital, IBA. You can have private investors and whatnot. I think for me, if I could start back, I'd look at obviously making sure morals and values align with people that I do bring into the business from now on. But yeah, I think for me, it's just do your research, understand what your market is, understand what your point of difference is in what you're doing. Um, that's probably something that I will, that I would say.
Yeah, it sounds like being really clear on your vision and your purpose and, working that into somewhat of a pitch. And I think, for a lot of interns who do think of going down that route into entrepreneurship, a lot of the pitch training that we do at Career Trackers will end up being really useful. It's not just about
Sorry, losing you, Aaron.
but, pitch and relationship.
Sorry, you're cutting out, Aaron. Jalen, is she cut out? I can see the questions here, so I'll just read them out because I've lost Aaron here. I don't know if it's her or mine, but yeah. So I love your comment about the river grounding you. Do you have any other places or techniques that help you focus or to practice self-care? Owning your own business must be stressful. Sorry, I'm trying to read it on a small screen. Yeah, for me, I guess, I love the river. I love the fresh air. Um, I do play a little bit of golf here and there. So that is probably one of my other things that I love to do. The great thing about golf is you can actually go by yourself as well. Um, it's probably really bad time to go if you're not hitting them too well. Then it just gets you frustrated. But I'm also a big music person. Listen to everything and anything. But I obviously have a playlist that just sort of helps me chill out, clear my mind. Usually, probably a lot of country sing-alongs. You know, that help me sort of just mellow out. Um, I guess for me, it's I've got to enjoy my own time. And the other thing I do love is probably watching the same show on repeat over and over that doesn't need my attention. Something like a Brooklyn Nine-Nine, where I can just sit there and not have to pay attention to it. It's just background noise for me. It's something that I just don't have to look at, don't have to pay too much attention to. It's just easy for me to keep moving. So they're probably the places and sort of techniques that I love to sort of enjoy, and help me practice my self-care. Um, One more here. You wear a lot of hats with business, sport, family, and cultural obligations. How do you manage these different roles and separate them, or do they all connect together? Um, yeah, there is a bit of overlap. That's a great question, to be honest. They do overlap quite a bit. I mean, if I do look at my time in sport, as I got a bit older, I realized how much more obligation I had to make sure that the space that I have just come from is culturally safe for the next kid to come through as well. Um, I've experienced my fair share of racism um, within sport itself. That you know, I wanted to make sure that that same thing wouldn't happen to a kid who is coming through to play. The same thing with business. I remember someone asking me, you know, if at the current time of the breakup between my business partners and I, someone asked me, would you sell your business to anyone in your family with the current investors? And the same thing, I said no. So understanding that they do all overlap at some point in terms of cultural obligations, both in sport and business. Um, I guess the family stuff can be a little bit challenging. I think it's probably a little bit more challenging than the other two because you have so much family. How do I say this? Not conflict, but having a big family, everybody wants wants a bit of you, and always obviously are asking for something. So, but at the same time, they're probably the one thing that keep me grounded the most. As much as sometimes they drive me a little crazy, I always find myself being the happiest when I'm with my family. Um, Especially after mum's cooked a nice chicken curry. It's always nice to sit back, and usually I'm the butt of the jokes at the family table. So yeah.
I think I'm back now. I am so sorry. It wouldn't be an online conference without some tech difficulties. I've just relocated to another part of the building. It looks like you saved it, so thank you so much. We've got another question that's come through about what has been one of your most favorable moments in life and why. Pretty big question. So, nothing much to pinpoint, but personal, professional, something that has really stood out for you.
Yeah, look, I probably can't really pinpoint too many. I mean, I wouldn't say I'd. There's probably way too many to even pinpoint. A lot of them have been very memorable for very different reasons. You know, so I can't probably say that I have one favorable, one favorable moment. I think a lot of them have been pretty good, and there's been a lot of lessons that have come from those moments as well. And a lot of teachable moments for me, um, more than just them being favorable. Um, I mean, probably, man, it's hard. I mean, seeing my dad cry for the first time was pretty crazy. In saying that, that was obviously because I just played in a grand final here in Adelaide, and there was about 40,000 people at our grand final. Um, and I never ever seen my dad cry. And we'd won, and I seen him at the fence as we were doing the lap, and gave me a hug and started crying. I think that was sort of a pretty surreal moment, to be honest with you. My dad was sort of like the tough guy of the family, so.
Yeah, and I imagine quite a few of our interns will probably experience as they go through, big life milestones as well, like graduation or, getting their first really exciting job. When, someone who's usually pretty stoic in the family, is just overcome with pride. So, definitely a very memorable moment. Not a question to end from the audience, but Maddie Anderson, I think, has just resonated with something that you said that, really lovely to share with the entire group. But she loved your comment on how you connect with country by visiting the river. Her mob is in Perth and she's based in Newcastle, so I've always felt disconnected because she can't physically be on country. And so she'll be thinking quite differently about that now.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's sometimes it's nice just to think outside the box. How can you actually be close to home without being home? Obviously growing up and growing up on Ghana country, and being a Ghana person, you're pretty much in the city. It's nice, but for us, it's if we weren't, every time we go and do something culturally, it's always off on a different family country. So we're always on Narunga country growing up over at Port Vic, jumping off jetties and all those things. Um, Hunting and fishing and whatnot. Or you go the other way and you're going to the river. Obviously, you know, props to you if you love the salt water, but can't physically do it. Sharks are in there, whatever else is in there, can't do it. So take me to the river. And obviously, again, both a fair bit of a drive from me from where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. We just had one more question come through, and I feel like it's a sports related question, and I don't know the meaning of it, but it's been asked, so I think it's legitimate. But what's your golf handicap?
Yeah, look, I really suck at golf. I just like golf because it's therapeutic for me. I don't have a handicap because I'm that terrible. I hope that answers your question, Will. I'm probably better than
You
Jade.
are your own handicap then.
You're cutting out again. You're gone. She's gone. She's definitely gone. I think that's all the questions. Hand over to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Anthony, for that. Appreciate you coming out here and giving your time and support to the Career Trackers community here. I just wanted to say that, no, I did love what you were saying about it was really simple. I never even thought about it, but the Dory, just keep swimming. And you've proven it, with going to at the AFL level, not sort of coming back down from there and then going to uni, failing at that 3 times, but you always was like quite persistent and resilient with it. And you've proven that we are more than sports people. As Aboriginal people, we can go do other things. We're not just in just sports. Just with your whole business as well. I love what you're doing, brother, because the whole thing about mixing the Western world with Aboriginal culture and just what you're doing with Ghana language and the soaps, shampoos, all the stuff like that. It is a very innovative idea, and I think you're the only one that can think of that is doing stuff like that. And last little comment from me, yeah, just your thing of what you said about the obligation to make a culturally safe space for the next generation. I can totally relate to that because I have had a bit of trouble with my internship. With recent things about 26th of January, but yeah, I think we can all sort of relate to it. You know, you've got to make the space culturally safe for the next generation, because and that's something that I have done, just by sort of stepping up and having a voice, because you can either people not going to like it or you're going to make change. So yeah. But yeah, as a gesture of appreciation, CareerTrackers will be sending you a gift. And that pretty much concludes our session for today. And we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow.